it is possible that 38 years before the present story, Dragon was one of the marines the government deployed to God Valley. This event could hold the keys to the past of Dragon's character, and why he decided to go on his crusade against the government. Dragon at God Valley could have not only seen with his own eyes the sheer brutality of the celestial dragons, but he could have also personally fought some of the most infamous pirates in history. The God Valley incident might have been when Dragon realized that the celestial dragons had to go down, but it is also possible that because of God Valley, he later based the revolutionary army itself on the Rocks pirates. Dragon would have been only 17 years old when the God Valley incident happened, which coincidentally is the same age Luffy was when he first set out to sea. It is likely that Dragon at this age was already serving in the Marines. The Marines are willing to recruit people who are very young, and Garp likely wanted his son to start serving early, just like he had intended with Luffy and Ace. It is also possible that Dragon at this age was already very strong, at least if his family is any indication. After all, Luffy at 17 was already someone beating warlords and top CP9 agents. One way to look at this is that Dragon as a marine could have essentially been the Kobe of the past era, a young prodigy trained by Garp, who was really strong despite his youth. While it is possible that Dragon was sent to God Valley with Garp, it would almost be more fitting if Dragon was already at the island before Garp showed up. More specifically, Dragon could have been one of the marines tasked with protecting the celestial dragons during their conquest of the island. The celestial dragons actually had an entire fleet of navy ships with them at the island, to help with conquering God Valley. Garp, knowing that his son was already on the island, could be why he was initially so confident that the situation was under control, and why Garp only went there because Roger was also going to God Valley. If Dragon was already on the island, he could have witnessed the God Valley incident from beginning to end in its entirety, and this could have left a huge impact on him. God Valley could not only be why Dragon hates the celestial dragons, but it could also explain a lot of other things about him. For example, another important character whom we know was at God Valley is Ivankov. Ivankov is seemingly a lifelong friend of Dragon's. Years after the incident, the two of them fought together in the Freedom Fighters, the organization that preceded the Revolutionary Army. It could be that God Valley was where Dragon and Ivankov had their first encounter, and that this shared history led to them wanting to depose the celestial dragons. Another thing we know about Dragon that could connect to God Valley is that he seemingly has some knowledge on the God's Knights, as he says that the revolutionaries' true fight will only begin once they face them. It is interesting that Dragon is so confident in saying this, because the God's Knights are a very mysterious group, who for example never played a part in any events in the present story. It could be that Dragon is actually speaking of personal experience here, and that he himself saw the God's Knights in action 38 years ago at God Valley. God Valley was also where the God's Knights' current commander, Vigarland Garling, was present, and it could even be that Dragon as a marine fought with him against the Rocks pirates. However, we also know that a figure far bigger than Ivankov or Garling was also at God Valley: Goldie Roger. Dragon is someone who is clearly very interested in Roger, as we know that Dragon actually attended his execution at Logtown 24 years before the present story. It is actually very interesting that Dragon of all characters decided to attend the Pirate King's execution. Dragon is not a pirate, and there is no clear connection between Roger and Dragon's goal of bringing down the celestial dragons. Perhaps Dragon simply wanted to see the man who ran circles around his dad for years, but I think there could be more to this. It is actually possible that Roger is the one who originally inspired Dragon to learn the truth of the Void Century, and that this is not only connected to the God Valley incident, but more specifically to Rox D. Sebek. Sebek is someone who is said to have broken many of the world's taboos, which very likely means that he was someone studying the Void Century. There is actually a lot of evidence for this. Many of the former Rocks pirates are clearly very interested in the ancient history. Both Kaido and Big Mom had several poneglyphs, and both of them seemingly held a lot of knowledge regarding things like the ancient weapons or the near-extinct races of the world. A really important detail, however, is that Big Mom was already coveting Road Poneglyphs and seemingly trying to reach the final island, even before Roger himself sailed there. This could all stem from Sebek, and that he was the one who originally shared much of this forbidden history with the other Rocks pirates. It is also extremely likely that this is the very thing that led to Roger himself coming to God Valley. Exactly 1 year before the God Valley incident, Roger and his crew were the first people in history to reach Lodestar, the final island on the Grand Line. It was here that Roger himself realized that Lodestar was not the true final island, and that there was one more island out there in the world. The reason why this is also important is because when Roger arrives at God Valley, he says that he has been waiting a whole year for this, which is exactly the amount of time since he went to Lodestar. This all seems like way too big of a coincidence. It could be that Sebek held some very important piece of the ancient history, which was something Roger needed to reach the final island, and that this in turn led to the Roger pirates attacking the Rocks pirates at God Valley. This is also where we'll come back to Dragon. Dragon is someone who is seemingly very interested in the Void Century. For example, he was personally acquainted with Professor Clover and the scholars of O'Hara, and Dragon also talked to Robin about the ancient history when she was with him during the time skip. The revolutionaries also call Robin the Light of the Revolution, which could very well have something to do with her being the only survivor of O'Hara who can read the ancient language. Dragon's interest in the past could all connect back to him having possibly been at God Valley. As speculated before, let's say that the thing that made Roger attack Sebek was indeed something to do with the ancient history. What the two could have been fighting over could have been anything from a special poneglyph or an artifact of the ancient kingdom. It is possible that this something was actually Sebek's mysterious treasure, which the government had stolen from him, and which was the entire reason for Sebek himself coming to God Valley. If Dragon personally witnessed what Roger and Sebek were fighting over, it could be that this experience led to him realizing just how important the Void Century was. The reason why Dragon is interested in the ancient history, and the reason why he went to Roger's execution, could all tie back to the God Valley incident. If Dragon saw some very important piece of history that Sebek had discovered, God Valley could have not only been when Dragon realized that the celestial dragons needed to be stopped, but that the way to do this was by learning the truth of the Void Century. God Valley's impact on Dragon could however go even deeper than this. This event could be the thing that shaped Dragon's view on the world, and it could also connect to the true purpose of the Revolutionary Army, beyond just defeating the celestial dragons. The God Valley incident essentially presents the great paradox of the One Piece world. The celestial dragons are complete monsters, who both enslave and kill innocent people for simple personal gain and pleasure. However, the celestial dragons organization, the world government, is also the only shield the people of the world have against pirates. A thing we frequently see in One Piece is that without the government's protection, there is very little stopping pirates from attacking and raiding the regular people who live in the world. If Dragon had been present at God Valley, he could have gotten a very strong first-hand example of this paradox, and what exactly is wrong with the world. In all of One Piece, God Valley is the single biggest example of the Celestial Dragon's cruelty, where before the arrival of the pirates, the island was the stage of the Celestial Dragon's native hunting competition. The competition is an event where the Celestial Dragons conquer a new piece of land for the world government, but while doing so, they reduce the entire native population to be sport in a massive game of genocide. This is further augmented by the Celestial Dragons also bringing their own slaves to the competition to serve as additional sport. At the same time, however, God Valley also demonstrates that the Celestial Dragons are not the only evil people in the world, with the Rocks Pirates. The Rocks Pirates were a brutal menace on the world, where they're described to be closer to a terrorist group than a pirate crew. We get a glimpse of this at God Valley, where Sebek lets his crew loose on the island, allowing them to attack the innocent civilians and slaves if they wish. If Dragon saw all of this, it could have had a big impact on him. If he actually wanted to fix the One Piece world, he would have to find an answer to this problem. The Celestial Dragons are evil, but they are also the only people with the power and influence to protect the world from pirates like Sebek. The God Valley incident also proves that the Marines alone are not the answer, and in fact, are far from the defenders of justice that they claim to be. Before any pirates even arrived at the island, the Marines were only there helping the Celestial Dragons with their killing of the local population. Then, when the Rocks pirates did arrive, the Marines themselves were also not strong enough to beat them, and they needed to ally with Roger to win. This could have very much disillusioned Dragon about serving in the Marines. When they are not fighting pirates, the Marines are simply doing what is in the interest of the Celestial Dragons. And even when they are fighting pirates, the Marines alone might not be strong enough to protect the people and the world from them. God Valley could be where Dragon realized all of this, and this could have made him understand that if he wanted to actually change the world, he would have to find a way other than being a Marine. And it could be that Dragon's answer on how to fix the world eventually became the Revolutionary Army. Essentially, the Revolutionary Army could be Dragon's own version of both the Rocks pirates and the Marines. Sebek on some level had the same goal as Dragon, where he also wanted to bring down the Celestial Dragons. While Sebek however wanted to be the king of the world, Dragon's goal is a lot more noble, where he only wants to depose the Celestial Dragons, but keep the world government. In many ways, Dragon seems to understand that the world still needs some order to protect the people even if he were to take down the Celestial Dragons. Despite it being their main goal, the Revolutionary Army is not only focused on fighting the Celestial Dragons. Dragon also uses his resources to protect the people from other evildoers, such as pirates like Blackbeard and Doflamingo, or from corrupt royals, like in the Sorbet Kingdom and the Goa Kingdom. While Dragon is willing to fight against people like this, he also understands that no group, not even pirates, is wholly evil. The Revolutionary Army itself includes former pirates, former Marines, and even former royalty. Dragon also does not believe that you need to be a revolutionary to make a difference, and sees people like King Cobra and Whitebeard as a force for good in the world. This harkens back to Dragon's very first scene in Logtown, where he's perfectly fine with Luffy choosing the path of a pirate. This could all be something Dragon learned from God Valley, where he could have personally witnessed just how complex the world really is. Another way to look at this theory is that the God Valley incident could have been the nexus for everything we know about Dragon's character. It could be where Dragon as a young marine became completely disillusioned with working for the world government, and where he realized that the Celestial Dragons were not fit to rule over the world. It could also be where he became first interested in learning about the Void Century. And lastly, God Valley might be where Dragon realized that there are good and bad sides to the Marines, pirates, and the world government, and that the Revolutionary Army is him combining the best aspects of all of these groups. Dragon's past and his mission to bring down the Celestial Dragons would also culminate very soon in the final saga. Even though he has been fighting them for all his life, the recent revelations that the government is being ruled by an immortal dictator and that they plan on sinking the entire world have finally pushed Dragon over the edge, and he plans on finally ending things with the Celestial Dragons. The outcome of this battle could however be very surprising, and it could at last explain what actually is the role of Dragon's character in the manga. Dragon has been a very inactive character in the well over 2 decades he's been in the manga. What if this was however all done on purpose? What if the reason why Dragon has done so little in the story is because the plan has always been for Luffy's father to have only one real arc? It could be that, of all the characters, Dragon will be the Whitebeard of the post-time skip, and that he will end up dying in a blaze of glory in his first real arc in the story. The reason why the manga might be going in this direction is that we might already be setting up for there to be a successor to Dragon. Sabo is now known throughout the One Piece world as the Flame Emperor, and it is said that he might currently be more influential than even Dragon himself. Over 60 chapters after this scene, Vegapunk makes a worldwide declaration that whoever will find the One Piece will change the world, and his declaration is accompanied by a page showing Sabo with some of the most influential characters in the story. It could be that this, and Sabo's prior build-up as the Flame Emperor, has a very specific purpose, where the story is setting him up as the future leader of the revolutionary army. To put this all together, Dragon might actually end up dying, not at the end, but in the middle of the final saga, with Sabo succeeding him and finishing the fight against the world government in the story's climax. While we'll come back to Sabo later in the video, let's first discuss the main man himself. A lot of fans may think that Dragon dying in his first arc would be a waste of his character, so let me argue why it would be the furthest thing from, and why this could actually be perfect for Dragon. The reason why I used Whitebeard as my example before is because he very much proves that you don't need more than one arc to make a big impact on the story. Just like with Dragon, the pre-time skip One Piece story spent a lot of time building up Whitebeard, only for him to die in the first arc where he got focus. This was however the opposite of Whitebeard's character being wasted. The Marineford arc essentially made Whitebeard the main character of the manga for over 24 chapters. Even though Whitebeard's character has only gotten focus in one arc, his impact on the story is still incredibly high, and he arguably overshadows a lot of series regulars who appeared in multiple arcs. This idea of less is more could be repeated with Dragon, where, even if he is given the spotlight for only one arc, it might actually be better than him getting several arcs but with less focus. We'll later talk about how Dragon's personal arc could happen, but for now, let's talk a bit more about Whitebeard, as I think he is a very good example of what I think the story might be planning with Dragon. Part of the reason why Whitebeard during Marineford was so interesting was actually the fact that we'd seen so little of him before the arc. A very good example of this is his first real moment in the arc, when he arrives at Marineford. This scene is preceded by an absurd overview of the military might the world government had gathered on the island to fight Whitebeard. Not only are there thousands of Marines present, but literally most of the strongest characters introduced so far in the story are also fighting on the government's side. This is then contrasted with the image of Whitebeard overlooking the entire island, fully confident that he can handle fighting against all these forces. What follows is Whitebeard for the first time revealing his devil fruit power, creating literal tsunamis that dwarf the entire island. This scene wouldn't have worked nearly as well if we'd already seen Whitebeard in action before the arc. There would have been no mystery as to how this one old man could possibly fight against all these enemies, and no surprise when we finally discovered the power Whitebeard wielded. This could be exactly what the story has always planned to do with Dragon, where the reason why he has not gotten any action is because the story might be saving Dragon for his personal Marineford moment. One thing that should be mentioned is that Dragon's character has been built up for far longer than Whitebeard was. As said in the very first sentence of this video, it has in fact been more than 1000 chapters since Dragon's original introduction at Logtown. Despite this, Dragon may still only need the same few dozen chapters of limelight as Whitebeard to make his mark on the story. The reason for this is that the way the story is exploring Dragon's character is the reverse of how Whitebeard was handled. With Whitebeard, he was still mostly an enigma before Marineford, where you can count with one hand the amount of scenes he'd had before the arc started. While Marineford was Whitebeard's arc, we've actually also gotten to learn even more about him after his death. Whitebeard appears very regularly in flashbacks during the post-time skip, and we've learned more and more about just how huge of a figure he was in the setting, as we explore more of the One Piece world. What does any of this have to do with Dragon, however? Despite Dragon still being an extremely mysterious character, unlike with Whitebeard, much of the groundwork on Dragon has already been done before his first real arc in the story. Over the years, bit by bit, we've discovered things like how Dragon founded the Revolutionary Army, his connection to Ohara, his past in the Marines, how he met Sabo, and his relationships with the different revolutionaries. While there's still a lot we don't know about Dragon, his character has at this point arguably been explored a lot more than other long build-up figures in the story, like Imu or Shanks. What this all means is that Dragon might actually be more ready for his part in the story to be concluded than a lot of fans realize. If the story decided to give Dragon his own marine fort, where the manga would focus on him for a couple dozen chapters and end in his death, it could be enough to tie everything together about Dragon, and he could even die being potentially one of the best characters in the story. This however leaves us with the big question: how would this actually end up happening? The video will next venture into more speculative territory, where we'll go over a huge battle between the world government and the revolutionary army that the story might be setting up for the final saga. Before we discuss this, however, it has come to my attention that my viewers have not done their duty and paid the heavenly tribute to this channel. The way I see it, this is pretty much treason. If you don't want to get an admiral coming after you, you better pay up by becoming a channel member as soon as possible. I will for now let you off with just this warning and continue with the video, but I hope you understand the gravity of the situation. The Revolutionary Army has now declared war on the Celestial Dragons, and things have only escalated since this declaration. These two factions are now essentially in a state of all-out conflict, with the government destroying Lucia Kingdom, the revolutionaries raiding the Celestial Dragons' food supplies, and Dragon now knowing that his enemy could end up sinking the entire world. What this also means is that both the government and the revolutionaries are on the clock. If the government does not deal with the revolutionaries soon, the chaos in the Holy Land will only escalate. Likewise, Dragon himself says that he wants to end things with the government quickly, before the world descends into chaos fighting over higher ground in preparation for the world sinking. What this all means is that the war between the revolutionary army and the world government could be coming to a head sooner rather than later. This could also be where Dragon's role in the story, after all these years, will be concluded. At the moment, it is genuinely possible that either side could attack the other. Dragon's words about higher ground could give a hint to his intentions, where he might actually be planning to assault the government on the Red Line, as it is the largest area of land above the sea on the planet. It is also possible that the government would be the ones coming for the revolutionaries to solve the issue of the Celestial Dragon's food. Dragon is also certain that the government will deploy the Holy Knights against them after they're stunned at the reverie. The government could also be further motivated to strike at the revolutionaries if they discover that Sabo is alive, wanting to hide Imu's existence at all cost. Regardless of when and where this battle will happen, or who will attack whom, it does seem likely that we will see a major clash between the world government and the revolutionary army in the near future. It is also very likely that Dragon would be the government's top priority target in a situation like this, as the founder and leader of the entire revolutionary movement, as well as the world's worst criminal. Eliminating him would undoubtedly be the most surefire way for the government to end the revolutionary threat. I will next share some ideas on how this battle could actually go down, and which characters could be involved. If the government wants to have any chance at beating Dragon and the revolutionaries, they would have to send some serious heavy hitters on this mission. Dragon is clearly very strong, where Ivankov during the summit forethought that there was no way the world government would challenge both Whitebeard and Dragon at the same time. Dragon's skill in combat is also seen in the fact that he is the one who trained Sabo, turning him into a fighter who's so strong that he can even hold his own against admirals. What this basically means is that the world government would have to deploy their best if they wanted to take out Dragon. Specifically, This would probably mean the Admirals, the Seraphim, the Holy Knights, or the Five Elders. It could even be that this situation is so important that Akainu, or even Imu himself, would take the field if it meant eliminating Dragon. While this may sound like overkill, this is pretty much how the world government operates. With these types of important missions, they always deploy an overwhelming amount of military power, as seen during the Summit War and the Egghead incident. These would all be fairly interesting opponents for Dragon to potentially face in battle. I will next discuss these candidates one by one. Dragon is a former Marine, and Akainu seemingly has some personal disdain for him based on Marineford, so it would not be surprising if the two have history. This is further reinforced by the fact that Akainu was one of the few people in Marineford who knew that Luffy was Dragon's son, before Sengoku announced it to everyone. Akainu could also actually be someone strong enough to beat Dragon in a fight, as we've seen with his pretty incredible feats in the story. The Five Elders could also be another very interesting candidate to fight Dragon. Dragon's goal has seemingly always been to bring down the Celestial Dragons, so him fighting against the highest ranked Celestial Dragons would make a lot of sense. The Elders are also the ones behind the Ohara incident, which was a very impactful moment in Dragon's life, and actually the catalyst to him creating the revolutionary army in the first place. Still, arguably, the enemy Dragon has been fighting against all these years, even if he did not know it, is Imu. As the actual king of the world, Imu is ultimately the one behind most of the destruction and horror the world government has wreaked on the world. If Dragon is to die in his fight against the government, it could make sense for him to die fighting against its true leader, and the one who's ultimately approved all of the government's crimes. What if, however, when we finally see Dragon in action during the story, it would not be against just one character? Let's say the idea discussed in the beginning of this video were to happen, and Dragon would get his own Marineford arc, where the story for a short period of time essentially made Dragon the main character. One of the best aspects of Marineford was the fact that Whitebeard was essentially a one-man army, where he did not fight against just one, but several characters. While the ones who in the end killed Whitebeard were the Blackbeard pirates, this was only after Whitebeard had already fought a literal horde of marines, including all three of the admirals. If Dragon is being saved for a bombastic arc centered around him in the final saga, he could end up doing something similar. For example, what if Dragon actually fought against Imu and the Five Elders at once? This could mirror Sabo's scene in the Reverie, where he had to flee the overwhelming danger of facing the King of the World and the Elders at the same time. Dragon could demonstrate just how powerful he is by being in the same situation, but unlike Sabo, he'd actually managed to hold his own and fight back. An interesting thing to note is that, as Dragon is a former Marine, he would be fighting against people who used to be his bosses. I guess this would make it pretty much a literal boss fight. If you want to go even beyond this idea, Akainu could also be a part of the squad who would fight against Dragon. This way, the story could explore whatever history Sakazuki has with Dragon. A lot of One Piece fights are used like this, where they're an avenue for the story to explore the combatants' backstories. This was for example recently seen in Garp's fight with Aokichi, which was accompanied by a flashback showing their history. Whether he'd be facing off against all of the Five Elders, Imu, Akainu, or any number of world government characters, it could offer a great opportunity for Dragon to live up to all of his build-up. He would not have to win, but to simply hold his own, and look as epic as possible while doing it. Whitebeard is hardly the only example in the story of just how cool a character can look, while facing off against overwhelming opposition like this. Arguably, some of Luffy's most fierce moments in the story come from scenes like this, where he's fighting against enemies he cannot beat, but chooses to stand his ground regardless. If Dragon's final moments in the story were to be in a fight against overwhelming world government forces, this could be both the first and last time where he would show off his full power. Naturally, Dragon should get some pretty stellar moments in an arc like this, Just to go over some of the possibilities, Dragon could demonstrate anything from having an awakened devil fruit, knowing advanced haki techniques such as future sight or conqueror's coding, to even something like him being a master of Rokushiki, due to his background in the Marines. Even if Dragon were to die, he would likely not go down without a fight. There would be a lot of opportunities to showcase just how badass Dragon is in this kind of a fight to the death. He could, for example, end up taking out some of the 5 elders. This would be pretty huge. Even though the elders are seemingly immortal, Joy Boy demonstrated that they can be overwhelmed by Conqueror's haki. Dragon could live up to his decades of build-up, by not only being one of the few characters who could harm the elders, but by also managing to kill some of them. If he is this powerful, another thing Dragon could do is potentially leave a permanent scar on Imu in his last stand against the government. This is something that happens with a lot of One Piece villains, where someone manages to scar them before they finally meet their end. This would likely get a big reaction out of Imu, who's remained sheltered in the Holy Land for centuries, and has possibly not been damaged since the Void Century. As brought up earlier, this is however all just speculation, and is only meant to give some kind of an idea on how Dragon having a last stand like this could go down. Beyond combat, Dragon could also do something that would change the course of the story in his final moments. If we look at other legends in the One Piece world, Roger, Whitebeard and Vegapunk all used their last minutes to pretty much set the world on fire, with just their words. Dragon's death could have a similar effect, where it could for example be a key moment in his revolution against the Celestial Dragons. Even though the government killing the head of the revolutionary army would be a massive win for them and a huge loss for the revolutionaries, it could also work backwards. Dragon is likely the biggest living symbol against the oppression of the Celestial Dragons, and him dying against them could make him a martyr. This could go even double, if Dragon in his final moments showed that the government can be beaten by taking out some of their key members, like the 5 elders. While I brought this up before, I should emphasize just how big of a deal Dragon killing an elder would be. Simply striking a Celestial Dragon was supposedly such a big deal that no one before Luffy had dared to do it in centuries. The elders are the highest ranked Celestial Dragons, who are the closest thing to gods in the eyes of the people of the One Piece world. Someone actually killing an elder would be a historic event, to say the least. If Sabo's actions in the Reverie ignited several rebellions across the world, something like this could set the world against the Celestial Dragons, more than any prior event in the story. Even more importantly, if Dragon died fighting against the government, he could echo one of the biggest themes in One Piece. People only die when they're forgotten. This idea was first mentioned by Dr. Hiroluk, who before being shot, declared that he would not die, as he would still live on in the memories of Chopper, Kureha, and other people close to him. We later learned that Goldie Roger had this exact same belief, where his last words to Rayleigh were that he was not going to die, despite Roger already knowing that he was going to be executed in the near future. Just like Roger's final moments made him immortal and caused the entire world to start looking for the One Piece, Dragon could do the same and make his own death further ignite the flame of revolution throughout the world. Dragon was actually present at Roger's execution, so it is actually possible that he was inspired by the Pirate King's final moments. He would have a very clear example of just how much the death of such a well-known figure can change the world. Knowing his own worldwide reputation, it is even possible that Dragon has always planned to make use of his death like this, in case he became a casualty in his war against the Celestial Dragons. The One Piece world is already rebelling against the government unlike ever before, and what Dragon could do with his death is throw an entire tank of gasoline on this fire. Now that we've discussed the idea of Dragon dying and what his death could mean for the story, the last thing I want to go over is Dragon's role after his possible death. Even if Dragon were to die, this might not be the end of his time in One Piece. I get that some of you may still think that Dragon needs more time in the story than just one arc, but this could still be accomplished even if he is dead. Just like with Whitebeard, the story could still explore Dragon a lot even after his death, with us learning more about him through other characters and flashbacks. Whitebeard is also not the only character the story has used like this. Ace, even before Marineford, had been a fan favorite character, where he appeared in multiple arcs, and even got his own cover story. He's however also a character who's gotten a lot more focus after his death than when he was alive, where he's to some degree referenced in most of the arcs after Marineford, and he even got his own 2 canonical light novels. In a poll I did on my channel last year, the majority actually thought that the Ace we've seen in flashbacks is actually more interesting than the one we've seen in the present story, as Dragon is clearly someone who's lived a very eventful life. Just like with Ace and Whitebeard, we could still keep finding out more about what he's done in the story, even if he died. I am not so much trying to convince you that Dragon absolutely has to die in the middle of the final saga. This video is simply meant to give you the idea that it would not be a waste, and that his character can still very much live up to his potential if this did indeed happen. Even if Dragon were to die in a grandiose way, where he would deliver a major blow to the government and further ignite his revolution across the world, this is not to say that his death would be all peaches and cream, however. To make one final comparison to Whitebeard, after his death, the surviving Whitebeard pirates and their territories were overrun by other pirates and the government, with the crew being completely scattered. Even if he died a martyr, Dragon's death would be a great personal tragedy to all the revolutionaries and the other characters close to him in the story. The revolutionary army would be left leaderless, and they'd have essentially lost their best weapon against the world government. However, this loss could also herald the next phase of the revolution. The story might very well be setting up Sabo to become Dragon's successor in the future. If Dragon did die and the revolutionaries were left in ruins, this could be Sabo's big character moment in the story, where he would pick up the torch, rebuild the army, and then end up avenging Dragon and finishing the revolution in the story's climax. Aside from Sabo's new fame as the Flame Emperor, another hint that the story is setting him up for leadership comes from how differently Sabo has been handled compared to most of the other right-hand men in the story. Essentially, Sabo has already shown that he has what it takes to lead the revolutionary army through his actions in the manga. While characters like Zoro, Rayleigh, Killer King and Marco had been with their captains since the beginning, Sabo came late into the revolution. Sabo was only 10 years old when Dragon rescued him in the Goa Kingdom, and the revolutionary army had already been active for years at this point. In fact, Dragon founded the revolutionary army the exact same year Sabo was born, meaning that he'd already been fighting the world government for over a decade by the time Sabo joined. In light of these circumstances, you'd expect Sabo to simply become another soldier in Dragon's army. When we meet him in the present story, however, Sabo is actually revealed to have risen up to be the revolutionary army's number 2 man, and Dragon's most trusted subordinate. This is something Sabo managed to do despite being just a kid when he joined, struggling with amnesia and having no devil fruit powers. Dragon's other officers are also no pushovers. We've seen that Dragon might actually have some of the strongest subordinates of any One Piece organization, as they're able to hold their own against Navy admirals. All of them are also considerably older than Sabo, and had seemingly been in the army for years before him. Yet, Sabo, when he was just a youth, managed to jump over all these senior officers and become Dragon's right hand. Sabo did not only accomplish this, but the other revolutionary army commanders are seemingly just as much his followers as they are Dragon's. Just as an example, take a look at how the commanders dress. Most of them have actually copied Sabo's look, where they're wearing the same kind of hat and goggles that he does. This style does not originate from the revolutionaries, but from Sabo himself, as he already had this style before he joined. The most likely explanation is that this is a style Sabo inspired in the army. It is also not just the way they dress, but the commanders also clearly have a lot of faith in Sabo. Most of them didn't believe that he had assassinated Cobra, nor that he died during the reverie. Some of them did not even believe that he died at Lulushia, despite all evidence to the contrary. Actually, I do not think there's really any moment in the story where the revolutionary commanders have anything but good things to say about Sabo. This once again sets Sabo apart from the other right-hand men, where many of them actually have friction with their comrades. The obvious example of this would be how Zoro and King are constantly at odds with Sanji and Queen respectively. This however extends to other right-hand men too, where, even though Katakuri is seemingly on good terms with most of his siblings, Perospero still thinks that he should be the one to lead the crew if Big Mom were to die. If this occurred with the revolutionary army however, and something happened to Dragon, it seems pretty obvious that they'd all follow Sabo without any conflict. When Sabo was first reintroduced to the story during Dressrosa, a lot of readers, including myself, thought that he wasn't much of a character. We didn't yet know that much about him, and he almost came across as just another ace. This was mostly because Dressrosa focused mainly on Sabo as Luffy's protective big brother and the heir to Ace's devil fruit. After Dressrosa, however, we've gotten to know a bit more about Sabo, and it is pretty clear that he is very much his own character. I will next discuss just how exactly the manga has brought this to light, and how Sabo's actions after Dressrosa really tell us what his character is all about. Basically, Sabo is a revolutionary, true and true. The time in the story when we truly learn what kind of a man Sabo is as an adult is when he infiltrates the reverie. Before the start of his mission, Sabo is extremely eager to go to the Holy Land, and to declare war on the Celestial Dragons. In the Holy Land itself, the revolutionaries had 3 goals they needed to accomplish: rescuing Kuma, destroying the Celestial Dragons' food supply, and declaring war on the Celestial Dragons by destroying their sacred Dragon Hoof monument. During the mission, Sabo once again shows that he cares a lot for his fellow brothers in arms, where he's shocked to discover what the Celestial Dragons have done to Kuma. Sabo also had no plans of himself or any of his guys getting captured, and was committed to either succeeding or dying in the attempt. The mission was also met by a massive hindrance, where due to pure coincidence, 2 Navy admirals were present at the reverie. Despite this, however, the revolutionaries succeeded in all their objectives. Even though they had to fight the admirals while doing it, they both managed to rescue Kuma and accomplish their tasks. But Sabo was actually not satisfied with this. Having completed all his objectives, Sabo, by himself, actually planned to assassinate all of the 5 elders. This arguably shows just how ruthless of a character Sabo actually is. He doesn't just want to beat the Celestial Dragons, he literally wants to kill them, and even do it in an underhanded way if given the opportunity. This is pretty cold as far as One Piece characters go. Most of the time, the good guys are usually content with their enemies being taken from power. This even went for someone like Law, who was satisfied with Doflamingo being imprisoned, even though getting revenge on Dofi had been his life goal. While Sabo is likely fully aware of how evil the Celestial Dragons are, his lack of sympathy for them could also be personal. Due to his amnesia, Sabo's earliest memory for years was that a Celestial Dragon tried to kill him back in the Goa Kingdom. He also carried a daily reminder of this attempt on his life, where the scar Sabo has over his left eye came from this event. While Sabo may not be fully motivated by revenge, as his heart is clearly in the right place, there could still be some darkness to his character we haven't fully explored yet. When Sabo actually met the elders in Pangaea Castle, he also discovered the world government's biggest secret by seeing Imu. Sabo could have still fled at this moment, fully knowing that if they discovered that he had seen Imu, the government would make him one of the most wanted men in the world, even if he survived. Instead, Sabo in this moment actually chose to reveal himself, just to try to rescue Cobra, someone who had no prior history with him. The way Sabo also went about this was very cold-blooded, where he without hesitation just blasted the elders and Imu with a fire fist. Sabo did however fail here, where even though he escaped, Imu managed to wound and kill Cobra. Sabo's scenes at the Reverie actually do a lot in revealing what kind of a man he is as an adult. He is extremely dedicated to both his comrades and the cause, and he could even be described as being merciless towards the celestial dragons. In addition to this, the Reverie also shows just how ballsy Sabo's character is. We already knew from Dressrosa that he was someone completely fearless, even when facing a Navy Admiral on his own. But we only truly get the idea of how much of a mad lad Sabo is in the Holy Land. With no prior plan or backup, Sabo simply took the opportunity to raid Pangaea Castle by himself, just for the chance of assassinating the elders. Then when he encountered Imu, he still chose to take the risk and reveal himself just to rescue King Cobra. This is not to say that Sabo is just a lunatic who charges into danger without any consideration. We've seen that he's actually very smart and resourceful. When he arrived in Lulusia, Sabo only contacted Dragon after he was on the ship away from the island, with all the recruits he'd gathered from the country. When he decides to tell the revolutionaries about Imu and what he saw in the Holy Land, Sabo also chooses to only tell Dragon and Ivankov, knowing that telling this information to others would just put unnecessary lives at risk. Arguably, this once again shows Sabo's quality as a leader. He's someone who's willing to put himself at great risk to get the job done, and by his own words, is ready to die for the mission. He is however also very conscious of putting others at risk. He takes the most dangerous jobs on himself, and tries to minimize the risk he places on other people as much as possible. On top of this, Sabo also cares a lot for the well-being of others, be they his own comrades or just innocent bystanders. Putting this all together, Sabo is actually a very heroic character. In retrospect, it's not really a wonder that his actions at the Reverie made him such an inspirational figure. Fitting someone who's a hero, Sabo is also not really comfortable with his new reputation, and actually doesn't like his new title of Flame Emperor. Though this is likely also because he earned it for people thinking that he was the one who assassinated Cobra. What we've essentially learned about Sabo after Dressrosa is that he's ride or die for the revolution, and that he shows a lot of leadership qualities not seen in most right-hand men in the story. Sabo is very dedicated to his subordinates, and they in turn have a lot of loyalty and faith in him. More importantly, however, Sabo is also able to make decisions and act completely independently of Dragon. After going to the Holy Land, Sabo encountered several unexpected challenges, but he managed to deal with all of them completely by himself, including decisions that involved other people. In this regard, of Luffy's followers, Sabo is more similar to someone like Sanji than he is to Zoro, where he is able to think on the spot and not always brute force his way through problems. This would be a key attribute to have if Sabo ever were to pick up the torch and lead the revolutionary army in Dragon's stead. One final thing I'd like to discuss in this video is the story potential of Sabo becoming the leader of the revolutionaries. Basically, there's a lot of potential plot elements the story could pull from if Sabo were to become one of the main characters in One Piece's climax. Sabo becoming the head of the revolutionary army would probably mean that he'd be one of the main characters in the story's endgame. This could work pretty well for Sabo, because he's actually very connected to other important characters in the story. Naturally, he's the sworn brother of both Luffy and Ace. While the latter is dead, we've seen that his actions still influence the story even in the final saga, and we constantly meet other characters who have a history with Ace. Due to his childhood, Sabo is also connected to Garp, though admittedly less so than Luffy and Ace. What is however interesting to note is that Sabo is pretty much the only character in the story with a relationship with Luffy, Luffy's father, and Luffy's grandfather. Even Luffy himself doesn't have any relationship with Dragon, and Sabo's character could play an important role if this is ever explored. Outside the Monkey family and the revolutionaries, Sabo is also one of the very few alive characters who's met Imu. He is also pretty much the only good guy next to Vivi who now has a personal connection to Imu. as Sabo both fought Imu, and the latter destroyed Lelouchia Kingdom in an attempt to kill Sabo. This could also be very important to the story, as due to Imu sheltering himself from the world, he has essentially no history with almost any of the main characters. One more overlooked character Sabo is connected to is Bonnie. While the two only met briefly during the reverie, I think the story could actually be setting something up here. After the Egghead arc, Bonnie might end up becoming a far more important character in the final saga than a lot of readers initially thought, as she can literally command all of the Pacifista based on her father. Sabo and Bonnie are certainly already somewhat connected through Kuma, but what could be even more interesting is Bonnie's lineage. Bonnie is the biological child of both a Revolutionary Army commander and a Celestial Dragon, which is something that rather contradicts Sabo's worldview. I do not think Sabo would act negatively towards Bonnie, however, if he found this out. After all, the two are kindred spirits in this regard. Sabo's own biological family is the royalty that rules over the Koa Kingdom, and his own path in life is living proof that your birth does not determine what kind of a person you are. Still, Bonnie's lineage makes her a very unique character in the story, and could be something the story could use to further develop Sabo. Speaking of which, Sabo's family background could also be something that might still have some relevance in the final saga. Sabo's adopted brother, Steli, is now the king of the Koa Kingdom. While seemingly an inconsequential character, Steli did get a surprising amount of focus during the Reverie arc, and he might still have some role to play in the story. These are the bigger examples of Sabo's relationships with the One Piece cast, but he certainly also has more, such as him spending the 2-year time skip with Robin, him fighting the Blackbeard pirates on multiple occasions, and all the characters he met on Dressrosa. While you could think that some of these are really minor examples, One Piece can be very surprising in what parts of the prior story end up becoming relevant. After all, the recent beginning of the Elbaf arc is built on something as small as Haryuden joining the Grand Fleet, and us for one time seeing his navigator in a cover story. What I'm trying to illustrate with these examples of Sabo's history and relationships in the manga is that the story has a lot of material to work with, if Sabo one day were to become one of the most important characters in the final saga, as possibly hinted at by the last page of chapter 1121. Because of his amnesia, the man Sabo is today is fully shaped by the fact that he was brought up by Dragon and the revolutionaries, and it is clear that this more than anything is the driving force behind his character. While he is still Luffy's caring and protective older brother, Sabo is also his own man, with his own story to experience. In a situation where Dragon were to die, Sabo would still likely continue the struggle and keep fighting against the government. As broken down by this video, Sabo seemingly has the qualities to be a fit successor to Dragon, and he could end up becoming both the man who finishes the revolution and one of the most important characters in One Piece's endgame. Monkey D. Dragon was already 34 years old when Luffy was born. It is not impossible for Dragon to have had children other than Luffy before this point. While we do not know much about Dragon's life, one thing we do know is that he had some kind of a connection to Robin's home island of Ohara. Robin's father is never named in the story, and the only mention we have of him in the manga is a vague line that Robin's mother continued researching the ancient history for his sake. Could it actually be possible that Nico Olvia's mysterious husband was actually Dragon, and that Robin is not only a secret member of the D clan, but also Luffy's biological half-sister? A poll I did on my channel a few weeks ago made it clear that this is a very unpopular idea, where only 19% of voters liked Robin possibly being Luffy's sister. I'm going to be blunt, I actually love this theory. I will later explain why I think Robin and Luffy being siblings could be really good for the story, but I'll first go over why it could genuinely be possible. There's a lot of things in the story that could actually indicate that Dragon is Robin's father, but the biggest hint is probably that the Ohara incident was clearly a massive tragedy for Dragon's character, and something that altered the course of his life. Dragon was disgusted with the incident, and after it had happened, personally came to the island with flowers, to pay his respects to the dead. The event impacted Dragon to such a degree that he declared that Ohara's sacrifice would not go to waste, which is the thing that led to him actually creating the Revolutionary Army. Dragon's reasons were clearly at least partly personal, as he told Vegapunk that he was acquainted with Professor Clover. It could be that Dragon was also connected to the other scholars too, however, which was the reason why he had such a profound reaction to the incident. Let's say that Dragon was involved with the scholars to a point where he actually was Nico Olvia's husband, and he wanted the scholars to keep researching the Void Century. The way Olvia's husband is described, it is said that the scholars were studying the history according to his wishes. This would fit Dragon's character, as him opposing the world government likely meant that he wanted to discover what they were hiding in the Void Century. It would also explain why Dragon reacted in the way he did to the Ohara incident. Not only would the government have literally killed his wife and comrades, but they were killed for the crime of studying the forbidden history. If Dragon had been the one who had originally wanted them to study the history, he could have felt guilty and responsible for their deaths, leading to him creating the Revolutionary Army as his penance. We know barely anything about what Dragon was doing before the Ohara incident. He was the leader of a group called the Freedom Fighters, and Vegapunk describes him as a pacifist. This could actually connect pretty well with him wanting to research the ancient history. Dragon probably already wanted to depose the celestial dragons at this point in time, but could have thought that revealing the truth of the Void Century to the world would have been enough to change the world government without war being necessary. After Ohara, however, Dragon might have realized that the only thing the government understands is force. Let's however stop for a second. Would Dragon being Olvia's husband even make sense for the story? Robin had to grow up with Olvia's brother on Ohara, and she was never told anything about her father. Would it make sense for Dragon to actually abandon his daughter like this? To be blunt, it actually would, because this is exactly how Dragon acted with Luffy. Luffy was left under the care of his grandfather at a very young age, and he only learned that Dragon was his father later in life. Dragon would have been 25 years old when Robin was born, and it could be that he at this point was already an outlaw opposing the world government. Like with Luffy, Dragon could have simply decided it best not to endanger his child by being in their life. The next question about this theory is probably, why did Dragon not try to protect Robin after the incident, when she was being hunted down by the government? A simple answer would be that Dragon actually did try to protect Robin. The revolutionaries had apparently been looking for Robin for years before the present story. It could be that Dragon tried his best to find his daughter after the incident, but because Robin was constantly hiding and on the move, he could never find her. Now that the basis for the idea of Dragon being Nico Olvia's husband and Robin's biological father is laid out, let's go over a few more minor hints that support this theory. One is that Dragon very clearly cares a lot for Robin. He was willing to take her under his wing for the 2-year time skip, and after she later returned back to the Straw Hat crew, Dragon still asks about how she is doing. Another hint is that Kuma after Sabaody specifically sent Robin to a location where she would end up meeting with the revolutionaries. Kuma is one of the few people Dragon told about being Luffy's father, which was something he had not even revealed to Ivankov. This could mean that he also could have told Kuma about being Robin's father. Then there is this very minor hint, which is that Robin has black hair, just like Dragon, whereas the hair color of Robin's mother was pure white. While clearly not much evidence, since there are so many characters with black hair in One Piece, I only bring it up because hair color in the past has been used to hint at a character's secret family ties. There's also the thing about Dragon always looking east. A lot of you are probably wondering what he's always looking at, and I actually found a panel that reveals the answer to this question. If we pan to the left, we actually see that Dragon is looking at the like button. Imagine that. Maybe you should take this as a cue to click it. If all of this is actually somehow true, and Robin is Dragon's biological daughter, the really interesting question is, does Robin actually know? Because Robin spent the time skip with Dragon, could Dragon actually have revealed that he was Robin's father? I actually do not have a good answer to this question. Dragon is clearly very private about this kind of stuff, and he did not even tell Luffy that he was his father when the two of them met at Logtown. With Robin in particular, if Dragon is her father, he could feel a lot of shame for failing to protect her, as well as letting Olvia die. On the other hand, because Dragon could feel that he let Robin down, it could also mean that he thinks he owes it to her, to tell her the truth. I personally do not think it would be out of character for Robin to have discovered this during the time skip, but to still have decided not to reveal it to Luffy. Robin is actually just as secretive of a person as Dragon, which now that I think about it, could be something she inherited. Robin keeping things close to her chest is for example seen in her not telling Luffy that Pluton was located beneath Wano, or even that Sabo was alive. If Robin discovered that she is actually Luffy's sister, it could be that this is another thing she decided to keep to herself. It could actually be pretty funny if Robin knew this, as she rather frequently acts just like a doting sister to Luffy, and pretty much allows him to do whatever he wants. Granted, Luffy and Robin's dynamic was arguably already like this in the pre-time skip. Now then, let's finally discuss why I actually like this idea. I'll first go over a few of the big reasons why I've heard people don't like it. One is that it could go against the found family dynamic of the Straw Hat crew. I do not think it would, however. The story has both examples of biological and non-biological families, and there are both negative and positive examples of both. Even if Luffy discovered that he had a biological sister, I do not think Luffy's views about his blood brothers, or even his crewmates, would change. Another criticism that I've heard is that One Piece already has enough secret family reveals. This is something I 100% agree with. I generally do not like these types of reveals, and believe they make the world feel smaller. Just to illustrate the problem, let's look at Luffy's journey in the East Blue in retrospect. The son of Dragon and the grandson of Garp happens to meet Shanks, who himself is a descendant of the divine celestial dragons. Then Luffy sets sail and ends up recruiting the descendant of Swordguard Ryuma, the son of Yasopp, and a prince of Germa, in the first few random places he visits. I do not think these reveals took anything away from these characters, but it does make the world seem far less big, when so many characters end up having really important secret families. However, I also think that this is kind of a bridge that has already been crossed. We've at this point had so many secret parentage reveals in One Piece, that a few more would not really rock the boat too much, since the boat was already capsized long ago. Robin being Dragon's daughter would also be one of the more minor cases of this, as both are established characters, unlike with something like us having never even heard of the Windsmoke family, before Sanji's lineage was revealed. Next, I'll discuss what the story could actually gain from this reveal. Robin being Dragon's daughter would actually mean that Robin is also a member of the D clan. This could actually be something very important for the final saga. While we just talked a lot about the different lineages of the One Piece world, being a member of the D clan is clearly something that is special among the rest. There has to be a reason why the government wants to censor the D from Roger and Luffy's names. There also has to be a reason why the elders after the Summit War thought that of all of their problems, there being new D-clan members on the rise was the thing they were most worried about. There also has to be a reason why Imu immediately decided to kill Cobra after he revealed himself to be a D. And there has to be a reason why Vegapunk had something he wanted to reveal to the D-clan in his broadcast, that the government did not want the world to know at all cost. Whatever is the reason that makes the D-clan so important, I genuinely feel like there being multiple Straw Hat crew members with the initial would only give the story more options. It would not mean that Robin being a D has to be important, but it would simply give the manga more tools to play with in the final saga. when we eventually find out what the Will of D actually means. It could also be rather fitting for Robin to be a D clan member. She has for years been interested in discovering what the Will of D means, and even before Luffy, other members of the D clan played a huge role in her backstory. Now that I think about it, I actually think the reason why Robin is so interested in the Will of D could be because Saul, the one who saved her, belonged to the D clan, which is pretty sweet. I think there is also an argument that Luffy and Robin being siblings could actually grow Luffy's character. It's true that Luffy essentially has his family in the Straw Hats, but Luffy has also shown a certain yearning for also having actual siblings. Luffy wasn't just content with being friends with Ace and Sabo, but actually wanted to be their brother, and he also acts differently with them than with his crewmates. This also applies to Luffy's biological family, where he still treats Garp like his grandfather, and acts differently with him than with any other character. If Luffy discovered that Robin is his sister, it would at the very least be interesting to see how he'd react. While their dynamic might not change that much, Luffy could for example emulate how he interacted with Ace and Sabo when being around Robin, as she would also be his older sibling. The way I see it, Luffy's character could only benefit from discovering that Robin is his sister. At the minimum, it would change nothing, and Luffy and Robin would have the exact same dynamic as before. At best, however, it would let us see another side to Luffy, and could be an opportunity to add something to his relationship with Robin, which is currently fairly one note. Still, the big reason why I think this theory could add to the story is because of Dragon. While there's potential in Robin being a D, or Luffy getting to have an older sister, it's also possible that even if these things happened, they would have no real impact on the story. With Dragon, however, the impact would be clear. If the world government had actually killed his wife and hunted down his daughter, Dragon's conflict with them would be a lot more personal and compelling. This would not mean that Dragon's motives would be entirely personal, as he was clearly working against the government even before Ohara, but it would simply add a lot of drama to his storyline. If the Straw Hats ever have an arc where they get to interact with Dragon, it would also make it a lot more interesting if 2 members of the crew were his kids, rather than just one. Before I wrap things up, I'd like to say that I'm aware that there's an excerpt from the One Piece magazine that says that Robin's father was a scholar that was killed. I've said this already in my prior videos, but the One Piece magazine is largely not canon, as it is not authored by Oda. The magazines do occasionally have material provided by Oda, such as devil fruit designs, but the above quote about Robin's father is not one of these cases. Thank you for finishing this compilation about Dragon's character. If you still want to see more of my content, you could click here to watch this video about why the Will of D might not actually be a good thing at all, and why every D clan member, including Luffy, could be carrying the same incurable disease as Roger. One more time, thanks a bunch for making it to the end of this video.